What's up, Steelers fans? Welcome back to another episode of Around the Burgh. I'm your host, Mitchell Wolf, and tonight we're going to get into the Steelers draft primer preview, whatever you want to call it. We'll be breaking down everything as the NFL scouting combine is this week. But before we get into everything, I'll introduce my co-host, Shane Kubis. Shane, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Definitely looking forward to the combine coming up here. A lot of players that I kind of just want to, as we talked about before, just kind of confirm some things about as far as athletic testing, stuff like that, and medicals as well. So,
Yeah, that's the big thing for
yeah, for sure.
combine for everybody. And we already have we see some players kind of
Mm-hmm.
opting out of it. We've seen Evan Neal's not going to be
Yeah.
doing drills. Matt Corral's not performing drills.
Stingley, I think, right? Stingley Jr. or
Stingley,
Stingley.
yeah,
Stingley. Yeah,
he's
Stingley
out
Jr.
too. Most of them are like kind of. I think Neal's just. I think he's healthy. He's just sitting out of this. He's going to do everything else.
Yeah, for a guy like him, I don't. A lot of the top guys, it never surprises me when they decide they don't want to
Yeah.
go out there and do it because there's not a lot he can do
Hmm.
there to raise his stock. Because even if he blows up the combine like we think he would athletically for his size, it's not going to change anything for him.
Yeah, and
So
like Corral and Stingley are still recovering from kind of
yes,
late
yeah,
season injuries, so that kind of
right,
makes sense for them.
yeah,
So there is some news that kind of came out today. There was a report from Tony Pauline of Pro Football
hmm
Network that the Steelers are targeting Jameis Winston, Mitch Trubisky, and
Teddy
uh,
Bridgewater, I think,
Teddy
right?
Bridgewater. Yeah, as their
Yeah,
next in the off season, which doesn't really shock me, to be honest. Those are all those names I'm pretty okay with. Bridgewater's boring, but he'll get the job done for a year,
right, yeah.
more so than Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. Like all three of those guys have the same thing in common in terms of none of them are going to have any guaranteed shots at being a starter
Hmm.
realistically. Bridgewater, I think he's one of those guys that's tough for me because I think he's a good football player, but he's not. He's never been good enough where it's like, okay, we can't do better than him, right?
Hmm.
Like he falls in that like weird line of like he's a starting caliber
It's like
quarterback, but
this.
he's not a
It's
yeah.
like the 16th to 20th best
Right.
quarterback.
Exactly. Something along those lines. And like you're always looking to upgrade from that guy so he never
Yeah,
stays around anywhere too long. So but yeah, he would definitely be, he'd be the safest bet for sure as
yeah.
far as like just give us like passable quarterback play. But we've talked about and personally I think we mentioned on the show of like, Trubisky is definitely a very interesting guy because he
Hmm.
has a little bit more upside. We
He's
haven't, he's
cheaper.
yep,
He's a,
gotten a year with Dable
he's
and
more
with
mobile.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that would I think you kind of swayed me to that side of things is like I think that would be like the top bargain slash just like give a guy a chance to be a starter again possibility. And then Winston just scares me because of the ACL. Like obviously I expect him to be back
Hmm.
healthy in time to get ready, but I just don't know how he's going to look because we didn't get to see a whole lot of him under Peyton last year. I mean,
Hmm.
he looked relatively okay, especially turnover wise, but still.
Yeah. The thing with Winston, and this is my same reasoning for not wanting Carson Wentz, which some
Yeah.
people are fans of, is that at this point we know exactly who those players are, and
Yes.
they can just take you out of a game in the course of like less like half a
Yeah.
quarter with just
Yeah. It's not.
insane
Yeah.
turnovers. And like with Wentz, like he was with Frank Reich, who was like the best coach for him possible, with a
hmm
really good offensive situation in terms of a great line, a very good running game, and solid weapons. And he, they had a winning record, but they couldn't make the playoffs, and he really messed up down the stretch. So it's if it doesn't work with all that, it's not going to work with the Steelers, who have a worse offensive line, and then a worse running game, and maybe equal weapons.
Right.
So I just don't see that working at all.
No, it's not. It's the problem with it again is with a guy like him. I'm too worried about him doing just enough for us to be passable, like he did with the
Hmm.
Colts, but not moving the needle too far either way, and possibly costing us games that other quarterbacks would have won.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like with Wentz, like I think that the Colts are going to end up cutting him from what I've seen.
Yeah,
But
seems
I
like
still
it.
just don't think he's worth the whatever salary he's going to command. I think you can
I
still
don't.
get
Yeah,
Trubisky for a lower rate and get, you know, at worst probably the same quarterback, and at best, a good bit better, I would say.
yeah. So
All right, so let's get into the draft. So right now the Steelers, they have 5 picks. They are projected to get a sixth, which would be a fourth round compensatory pick. So they're picking round 1 20, round 2 52, round 3 84, round 4 137, round 7 223, and round 7 239. So really a big gap in the day 3 range, which,
yes,
for a team that I think is pretty solid in terms of its depth, like they have the guys who are going to play on special teams, are going to be backups, and I think they're kind of okay with who they have. Not having those day 3 picks is not the worst thing, but I am very on board with them trading back from any of their picks in the first 2 days in order to get some more day 3 picks.
Yeah, I think especially if you move back in like the second or third round, primarily,
Yes,
because
definitely.
like with the first round pick, I just expect there's going to be a player there that's good enough that
Mhm.
is you're going to be drafting really good value at 20.
Mhm.
Where I'd rather get that guy that's a top 15-ish player that probably falls to us
Yeah.
just because of the way the draft I expect to go.
Yeah,
But
I think
yeah,
Daniel Jeremiah said in like a conference call he had recently, they said like this draft from like 6 to 60, that's where like the meat is. Like
yes,
that's like there's a
100%.
bunch, and that like the difference between 6 and 60 is not
Not nearly
very
as much as in
far
normal years. Yeah,
relative to
for
other
sure.
drafts. Exactly. But
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah, so with that, I think if you move back, especially like in the third and pick up a couple extra later
That's what I was
picks,
yes.
like because you mentioned that here, like that would give you a few more darts to throw in a
Mhm.
draft that could have a lot of guys in that range that could end up being contributors, especially
Mhm.
for a team that drafts well, like we
Yeah.
do in the later rounds. So I do hope that they, regardless of how they really do it, do add some extra picks in that range on day 3. So
Yeah. And like in my opinion, this isn't necessarily the Steelers' opinion. This is more of the
right.
opinion of the Viking. Well, Rick Spielman, who was with the Vikings and the Patriots,
Hmm.
is the draft is about it's at bats, and just the more
Yes.
at bats you get, the more likely you are to get hits. It's that simple. So
Yeah, that's
the
what it
more
comes
picks you
down
have, the
to.
more likely you are to get decent players. And
Yeah.
if you have like the Seahawks had like 3 picks last year or something crazy because of
Hmm.
all their wacky trades and terrible drafting. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I just don't want that. So and like I said, like I don't not having 5th and 6th round picks is not the worst thing because those are kind of really anything after the 5th is pretty much just kind of a dart throw.
It really is, yeah. You just
So
don't have the resources to commit to really fleshing those guys out a lot of the time and really knowing like what you're going to have there. And most players at that point have some sort of major preconceived flaw of
yeah,
some kind
exactly.
that you're dealing with. So
Yeah. And so so we were saying the trade possibilities, all of them are trading down. This team does not have the draft capital to
no,
trade
we're
up.
yeah,
So I think even the consideration of trading up for a quarterback, they just don't have the ammo to go do that without
no,
really screwing with the rest of their roster. And based on who they're targeting as veterans to bring in, I really don't think they're going to be trading up for any of the quarterbacks. If Malik Willis falls in their hands, maybe.
then
If
yeah, then fine.
yeah,
But
yeah. So so trading down in the first round, I'm looking at Green Bay or Detroit because typically you see draft trades be cross conference because teams don't want to help teams in their, especially their division.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and with those teams, Green Bay has a good amount of draft capital. They might have players they really want because I honestly think Aaron Rodgers is going back.
That's what I'm guessing is going to
Yeah,
happen. That it just makes too much sense. Like I don't see anything other than he's either going to not be playing football anymore or he's going to be playing for the Packers. That's
I
just what I
realize
think.
I realize we're saying this, and then he has his McAfee appearance tomorrow.
So
So
hopefully we're right.
by the time you're listening to this, we'll probably have the answer, and we'll either
Yeah,
be
most
right
likely.
or extremely wrong. But I think they bring back Rodgers. I think they bring back Devontae Adams. So
Mhm.
they're going to want to trade up and get some really high quality pieces to try to make another run at it. So I think they might see a guy that they
I could
want and
see them
trade up.
moving up for one of the edges that fall in
Yeah.
that range because they're probably going to have to get rid of Smith just
Yep.
cap wise,
Both of them.
and yeah, both of them. Yeah, I mean, as good as Gary was last year, and I think he's a great piece for them now that he got to play more.
Yeah.
They need to have another guy off the
Oh
edge
yeah.
that they can rely on. So that's probably where they'd be looking at
Yeah.
going after. So
Yeah. And then I also have Detroit just because they also have a ton of draft capital.
Mhm.
With I think that's the less likely, but just because again they might have a guy they really like and they want to go up and get like into Kobe Dean or something like
Right,
that.
somebody like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that way the Steelers still stay in the first round. And I don't think they'd want to trade out because I think they like having that extra 5th-year option for whichever guy they take in the first.
Yeah, especially like if there's somebody they think they can get there and have that
Yeah.
control them. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So then in round 2, it's a little tougher because trading up into the second round is a little weird because you can kind
Yeah,
of bet on there's enough good players in that range that you can kind of maybe bet on whatever guy you want falling to you
right.
or the guy he goes and you can get another guy you feel comfortable with. So, but
Hmm.
in round 3, because that's the end of the second round, there might be guys falling that teams are in love with and want to try to snag. So with those, I have Arizona, Buffalo, and Kansas City down. And again, these are, teams that are kind of at the height of their powers and just need to go out and get guys to fill specific holes. So
Hmm.
those teams kind of caught my eye. Again, I think Kansas City has a good amount of like compensatory picks and picks in later rounds, so they could trade up to do that. Buffalo doesn't really do much trading, so they'll probably just
No,
have
they
top
don't.
picks and stuff.
Yeah.
But again, and this is all for the purposes of acquiring picks in rounds 5 and 6 because we say those picks don't matter as much, but the Steelers are pretty good in round 5. Round
Yeah,
6,
they
there's Antonio Brown, but they're pretty
Right.
hit or miss in the 6th round. But round 5 has been pretty kind to them as of late.
Yeah, it makes sense to try to, especially like I said, in a draft that has so much just kind of not top end talent, but
Mhm.
so much throughout the draft of guys that can
Yeah.
either fill specific roles or give you more depth or upside at certain positions. It makes sense to try to have more dart throws in that range of people that you're going for there for sure.
Yeah. And so with that, we're going to dive into some tendencies that I've kind of seen over the years with
Hmm.
Steelers draft picks. So in the 1st round, you pretty much can bet on a Power 5 school. I'll look it up now, but I really couldn't tell you the last time the Steelers made a
I
1st round pick that wasn't
Yeah, I
a
don't.
power out of a Power 5 school.
Nothing comes to
It might be
mind.
Ben as a cool, which
It could be, yeah,
that kind of doesn't
because
count. I think, yep, it's Ben.
yep, that makes
And
sense.
before that, it was 1999 Troy Edwards out of Louisiana Tech.
Right, and he was the one who wasn't he, like he's one of the record holders in NCAA too.
I
So he
think he
even
might be.
even he
Yes.
was like one of the most prolific
Yeah.
receivers. So that makes sense then too why they would have. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just checking. Yeah. So that's the last one.
yeah,
And usually you can also bet on them being underclassmen. Najee Harris kind
yes,
of broke that trend.
yeah. That was a
Um,
weird specific situation
right,
though with
exactly.
him.
But
Yeah,
Devin Bush, Edmonds, Watt came out early, Burns came out early, Dupree came out early. I think Shazier did as well.
he had to have. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so all those guys are underclassmen. Again, with that 5th year option, getting young guys, you get them that extra year. So by the time they age out of that contract fully, they're only still like 25 or 26. So you
Yeah,
get some really good years there. And then this is kind of in the wake of the Jarvis Jones pick, because they really like to go after supreme athletes, guys that
yes, yeah,
test really well. So after Jarvis Jones, you have Ryan Shazier, Bud Dupree, Artie Burns, TJ Watt, Terrell Edmonds, Devin Bush, and then Najee Harris. So you know, like of those, like Watt might have been the worst tester, which is crazy.
Technically, yeah. I mean, because there's certain things he excelled at in
Yeah.
testing, but he wasn't this all around like huge workout warrior type of guy. He
Yeah.
was more of a really sound and everything, plus some elite
Mhm.
traits in certain areas. So
Yeah, because
yeah,
I think I read this like book that was like about like the combine drills and like how to use
Mhm.
them as predictive measure. And I think at the time it said like Bud Dupree has like the greatest like composite score based on all the drills ever
he was.
for his
I mean,
position. That
you
is
can
like relative to
you
size.
like you can see it on the field, but again, it's how
Mhm.
it translates, right?
Yeah.
Because like if he made it work for
Mhm.
us, especially down the stretch of his career with us.
Yeah.
But he's not obviously this perfect complete edge rusher, and he's never
Mhm.
going to be. Like that's
Yeah.
just kind of. But he used his athleticism to his advantage, but it does limit him because he's just not the most prolific actual pass rusher.
Yeah.
So.
And even like technically, if you want to take the 2020 first round pick, went to Minka Fitzpatrick, which
Yeah, I
all
mean, yeah,
those carry over as well.
yep, for sure.
But in the 2nd round, that's usually where they try to find some guys who are slipping.
Yep.
You think about all the wide receivers they've got in the last few
Mhm.
years. Those are all 2nd round picks. Thinking about guys like Stephon Tuitt, Le'Veon Bell. You know, and then again, these are usually bigger school guys. You see them
Yes,
kind
yeah.
of being like, oh, like this guy's slipping. Like we can, if Pat Frymuth, like we can get some value here.
Right.
Because of just how the board starts falling, usually because quarterbacks are going earlier.
Yeah, that's part of it for sure.
And then round 3 is where they kind of go off the wall, which for them, it's not even like that crazy.
Right.
But you think about guys like, I'm not saying like Alex Heisman was a good pick, but that was, you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of surprising. Think about like Cam Sutton, James Conner, Justin Lane, which, Deontay Johnson, and again, like none of these are necessarily bad picks, just kind of like, oh, there might have been guys that were expected to be higher on the board, but
Yes.
went there. James Washington, Chukwuma Okorafor,
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave is one.
Yeah.
So
It
that's
feels
kind
like
of,
they just kind of go for guys that like I said, if they're really a guy they really love, they
I
don't care if they have to take them higher. You know what
I
I mean?
think that, and I think this is kind of what I was saying about for the other teams trading into 3rd round is I think you're like, okay, like this is our last chance, like before the 3rd day where like kind of things go crazy. So like, let's just get the guy that we really want. And
Mhm.
they, at some years, go back a little further, you're looking at Sammy Coates, Dree Archer, Marcus
Yeah.
Wheaton, Sean Spence, Curtis
Yeah.
Brown, Emmanuel Sanders in 2010.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we hit sometimes, but
Mike
it does
Wallace in
seem
2009 and Keenan
right.
Lewis. So they have hit a while ago, but it's again, you're kind of going a little off the wall there. And then day 3, they kind of just pick who. I mean, like we saw like the Loudermilk trade, which is weird, but then they came back and got Quincy Roche, which is good value, even though he never played a down
Yeah,
regular
which
season.
that's still upsetting to me, but
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
But this is where you see like smaller school guys for them.
Mhm.
kind of you guys you expect to play on special teams, and like they're not trying to shoot for the moon or anything.
They're taking guys that they see being able to fill a specific role, whether like you
like
said,
even
special
like
teams
Jalen
or
Samuels and Marcus Allen,
guys like that for sure.
kind of guys, kind of like these are the more like hybrid players you would kind of expect them to go with. So that's the day 3.
Train award last year. So
exactly, yeah, another perfect example. So now we're gonna get into the needs, and I think we'll kind of go through some prospects to keep an eye on at the combine this week. Sure. So for me, the biggest immediate need actually right now is cornerback, and
yeah, it's fair.
That's my number one because you assume that Joe Hayden is gone. Akella Weatherspoon is technically not under contract. So you have Cam Sutton going into a free agent year, and then you have Justin Lane and James Pierre.
Yeah, so that's the thing about it. Like, obviously, offensive line from a team building perspective is the biggest need just because of what we're trying to accomplish on offense and everything. But if you're looking at just like lack of players that are actually able to play,
corners,
right? Like lack of players that are capable of playing every down or most downs.
Yeah,
corner's definitely the top one there, just because again, you don't know if anyone outside of Sutton is even going to be starting caliber right now on this roster, and they haven't shown that they are. And even Sutton had a rough year by his standards from what we saw year before. So that's going to be something where I'm not going to be surprised if the biggest free agent addition or the biggest or the first draft pick would be used on that position. It's not going to be surprising me at all.
Yeah, and like we said, like that's where we expect them to assign Akella Witherspoon and maybe go after a guy like J.C. Jackson or Stephon Gilmore. At which point, that need would drop for me.
Yes,
especially if they sign both a good bit. And depending on who they sign, it kind of vacillates. But I still would expect them to invest there because, the guys they have the back end of that, Justin Lane, James Pierre, like
didn't show enough.
They have not shown enough to be, defensive play. Like they might be able to do special teams. Lane to less extent. I think he might.
Pierre is, I think, going to be a good special.
Pierre can be a special teamer
but
for sure.
So,
and then so for guys we're looking at again, and so archetypes for corners are very important for Steelers.
Yes,
they're not going to draft the small guys after the Senquez Golson debacle. So especially early, look for taller than 5'11", more than 190 pounds. That's kind of the archetype, and power 5 for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So the guys that I'm looking at are Martin Emerson from Mississippi State, who's a big, tall, like long zone corner, 6'2", 200 pounds, who I really like. I think he's not getting nearly enough attention in this class.
This corner class is tough to kind of get your name out there.
It's loaded. It's a loaded.
There's
class.
a lot of guys at the top.
And I think that was one of the positions Kevin Colbert highlighted as being very deep.
Yes,
when he did that in press conference, and people were kind of saying like, oh, he thinks the draft is not deep at defensive tackle, guard, and center. I think that that indicates to me that that's where he's gonna go after early.
Right, exactly. That would make the most sense
because you can't get that later on. Like like I said, there's a huge drop off between Tyler Linderbaum and Alec Lindstrom, and then it's a whole smattering of guys that nobody really is sure on.
Right. Yeah.
So Kyler Gordon, 6'0", 200 out of Washington, just a pure press man corner if the Steelers want to kind of bring that over from the Flores defensive tree. Kyrie Elam, 6'2", 196, Florida corner. He's going to be a really good athlete, really long.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's where the way the NFL is going right now.
Yes.
Darion Kendrick from Georgia, formerly of Clemson, former wide receiver, played for Georgia this year, played a really solid playoff run. He's 5'11", 204, so he's a bit of an odd build, but I know some people really like him. Some people have him like as one of the top 5 corners in this class. Not sure he stays there, but that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
The other guy is Kobe Bryant from Cincinnati, 6'1", 192, I think. Played across from Sauce Gardner. Is a little more versatile than Sauce, but not as good. Lante Taylor, 6'0", 196 out of Tennessee. Really good tackler, another kind of long zone press guy. Tariq Woolen's a name to keep an eye on from Texas San Antonio because he might have the best combine of anybody.
Yeah,
he's 6'3", 205, and he runs like the wind. And he's another former wide receiver too.
Yeah, he's definitely gonna be one of those guys that like the teams that do tend to get caught up in the combine a little bit too much could totally push him up their boards a lot for sure, just from the athleticism.
And then another Tariq Castro Fields from Penn State, 6'0", 194. They've invested in Penn State defenders before with Marcus Allen. I'm thinking Jaquan Brisker. So he would make sense in like round 4. If he's still around, just because he's solid across the board. He's well rounded. He's not super great at maybe any one thing, but he can be solid across the board, kind of a Cam Sutton mold a little bit. Any other corners that you have kind of come
I
across?
mean, I'm a big fan of a guy who just barely is going to hit these metrics at all if he does hit them, and that's Trent McDuffie.
That's yeah.
But
I had him, but I was like, he's not going to
yeah,
be 5'11".
yeah, he's not gonna. That's the problem. Is that I just feel like he would be the ideal if you want to get a guy that can play the game similar to the way Joe Hayden has played for us.
That is a really
That's
good
the thing.
comp. Yeah,
That's the whole thing with him. Is like they've loved having Hayden and what
Mhm.
he's been able to do, and you can get a younger, more athletic version of that with
I
him. And is it too early for them for a guy like him? Maybe,
I think
but
I think
yeah,
he's got to be. I wanted. I'm not sure if he's still around at that pick.
right. He might not
Two,
be.
he's got to be at least 5'10". Like if he's
Right.
5'10" and an eighth, they'd be like, all right, we
Yep.
can
We can
we
make
can
that
work
work.
with this.
But
And
yeah,
but yeah, if he's 5'9" and three
it's not
quarters,
going to happen for the
nope, not
Steelers. No,
happening.
I don't see it. So that's the only
Yeah.
one I can think of. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So next big need is right tackle.
Mhm.
Obviously, like Chooks is probably moving on.
I assume so.
They
Yeah.
don't really have anybody. I guess Zach Banner's still there, but I just don't think that's the move.
He's probably a cap casualty if we had
Yeah.
to guess at this point. I mean, I kind of hope so. No offense to him, like nothing against Banner,
Yeah.
but he just couldn't get on the field for an offensive line that was terrible. So like,
Yeah.
I unless he stays on the field or stays on the team and has a crazy training camp, I don't see him making an impact. So
Yeah. And for this one, you're gonna want to look at guys that are 6'5" or taller, 310 or more.
Mhm.
Steelers try to go big with their tackles. So the
Yes.
ones to kind of starting in like the second and third round, Darion Kendrick from Kentucky. Steelers have gone to Kentucky well a few times
Yep.
recently. They like that school. So I think a lot of people think he might be better at guard. I tend to agree with that. He's still a bit of a project, but he's a big
Yeah.
dude, and they might just like his ability to run block.
That's a big thing with him. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Tyler Smith, kind of a really younger player, is a redshirt sophomore. He's a late riser in this process, but he's big. He's played tackle. He's played left tackle for Tulsa. But I have heard a lot of good things about him. Again, he's a bit of a project, kind of in that shoot in terms of where he is on his timeline, trying to shoot Sakura 4 timeline of being young and new to the game, but has all the physical talent in the world.
Yeah, which is definitely something the Steelers should be investing. If they're going to take guys, later in the draft, especially at tackle, make sure you're getting a guy that has the physical upside to actually get somewhere.
I think this, in terms of, I don't think they would go this with their second round pick.
No, I don't
in terms of
think
how
so
they like to
either.
get value, because none of these guys are really value picks is where they're picking. These would kind of be guys that are like right for that spot, but they're not getting plus value out of it.
Right.
Daniel Falele from Minnesota, who is just Zach Banner 2.0, but
I think again that's the thing is like he's such a unique player that
yeah,
it'd be an interesting fit. I think he's more of a traditional tackle than Banner actually is as far as being able to handle every
yeah.
duty, I think. But it's again
He's
it's tough
this
because
would be
you
a
don't
big
know.
this is a big week for Falele, because ideally he's got to get his weight down a little bit, and he's got to show that
Yeah.
he can just not have an Orlando Brown Jr. testing day.
Right. He's got to. I think he's got to play under 370.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
I
it was
think he was
387 Senior Bowl. That's
right.
gonna be tough,
It's
but
tough,
yeah,
but like that's just my opinion. Like obviously, if he can make it look good at whatever weight, then fine. Like
yeah,
I don't care about his weight if he makes it look
yeah,
good. But it's really hard to to play
yeah.
tackle in the NFL.
One guy that I really like is Thayer Munford out of Ohio
Yeah,
State, who played left tackle for them I think he's actually played both tackle spots.
I believe so. Yeah,
And then they moved him inside to guard this year so they could play Nicholas Petit Frere at left tackle and DeJuan Jones at right, which
yeah.
was a decision. Some people like him a lot more at guard. I still think he can play tackle. I'm not sure if he might be like Dan Moore in that he's much more comfortable playing on the left side. So if that is the case, he might be off the board. But
Right.
they also like Ohio State guys, so I'd like Munford a lot. He's very technically sound. He's not the best athlete, but he
Right.
knows what he's
He's
doing.
a guy that I would love because if you take him and you let him try to play tackle, if he fails at it, you know that he probably
yeah.
can transition to guard. Which
Yeah.
I always like taking guys like if there's a guy that you're not sure about whether he's a tackle or guard, I'd much rather, and I've heard this from a lot of other people too, is fail him at tackle and then
Mhm.
hope he's a guard because it's so much
Exactly.
more valuable if you can get a solid tackle
Yeah.
than obviously trying to kick someone inside. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they might experiment with moving Kevin Dotson to right guard, because that's where he played all of college, so he might be more
right.
comfortable there. So then that opens up left guard, and that's better for previous left tackles. I have a bunch of day 3 guys. Another one that's kind of like Zach Banner is Bamidele Olaseni from Utah. I believe he's from England. He's like 6'8", 370. He's another huge dude who's just a freak athlete as well. So they might kick the tires on him in one of those 7th round picks.
Hey, honestly, like again, that's where you take guys like that, though. And
Yeah,
like you never know
exactly.
if it'll work out. I mean, look at Mailata for the Eagles and
Yeah.
his background, and look what he's
Mhm.
done. Obviously, I mean, his athleticism is pretty disgusting for his
Yeah.
size,
Oh
but
yeah, big time.
still, like, yeah,
And then offensive guard, this could be a 1st round pick. You could see Zion Johnson from BC, my guy, Kenyon Green from Texas A&M. And then I guess we'll lump center in there too. Like if Tyler Linderbaum falls to them,
sure,
I hope they would draft him. A lot of people are kind of saying he's zone specific. I think, thinking about Matt Canada's offense, there is a lot of zone concepts in there. So he could work there. And I still think he's just he's like one of my top 10 players in this class. So
that's the thing with this. I understand people, saying like, okay, well, they prefer him to be in his own system, right?
mhm.
And that's fine. But I think if you're drawing the line at that, then I 100% can agree with that. If you're drawing the line at you don't think he's a good player if he's not in that, I can't get behind
Yeah.
that.
I
That's
think
that's kind of where the line's
I
drawn,
think
right?
there is an argument to be had though about like him playing the AFC North, where he has to play the Ravens and the Bengals, and to a lesser extent the Browns, who like employ very large nose tackles. That could give him some problems.
Yeah,
So I
but
understand that might be
to a certain
a point
extent, yeah,
against him. But in the later rounds, Luke Gatekey from Central Michigan, he's a bit of a guard tackle hybrid. That could be a 2nd round pick, maybe a little early for him. Then like a bunch of guards in the 3rd round: Jamari
yes,
Sawyer, Justin Schaefer, both from Georgia. Those guys would be, complete ass kickers in the run game, so they'd
oh
be
yeah,
good to
for
add.
sure,
Lecitus Smith from Virginia Tech, Chris Paul from Tulsa, Marquise Hayes from Oklahoma, Cade Mays from Tennessee, Josh Sills. Josh Sills from Oklahoma State would be interesting. He's a much bigger guard. He's 6'6", 330.
yeah, you don't
And
see that much, yeah,
yeah, him and the last 2 or 3 I mentioned would be day 3 picks. So, I think that you don't find elite offensive linemen usually on day 3, but you can find guys who might be able to be like serviceable starters for a little bit. So
yeah,
taking one of those guards there wouldn't be a problem. And then at center, Luke Forner from Kentucky is very interesting to me because he's one of the few like day 3 centers that I feel comfortable with. And he's bigger. He's 6'4", 302. Played really well at Senior Bowl, kind of getting called up late. So I like Luke Fortner a lot as maybe in the 4th round pick if they want to move on
yeah.
from Kendrick Green, or at least
I really think I still think we've talked about this a lot, regardless of it doesn't really matter how they feel about Green at this point. The best thing for him and his chances to develop and become a solid player, I do think is still going to be playing guard
yeah.
and bringing in somebody at center who, at the very least, can push him if he
Hmm.
does stay at center, or possibly supplant him and force him into kind of developing as a guard, even if it's guard center, however you want to do it, having that
Hmm.
versatility would be the best thing for the line in general.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So moving on to the future needs.
mhm.
So those first were the ones immediate where like they need a starter now.
Yes, like 100%.
Future is, they're kind of a plan in place, but based on free agents and other things that they're going to need somebody soon. So the big one there is obviously quarterback. Again, I don't think they're going to invest a high pick there unless somebody falls to them, which I don't anticipate happening. But Malik Willis, Sam Howell, and Kenny Pickett are the 3 guys that I think they would be most drawn to in the
Yeah.
1st round.
And like the Willis talk is the one that we've been getting the most of for sure.
And again, like if you
Yeah,
sign Teddy Bridgewater and you want to draft Malik Willis with your 1st round pick, all right, fine.
sure.
Yeah.
If he's there at 20, and that's been my process. Like if he's there at 20, I'm not going to be upset at the value, obviously, and I'm not going to be upset with it necessarily. My biggest concern with him is I think that he has a lot to learn to
Hmm.
be able to play, and I don't know if I trust Canada to be the one to develop
No,
him.
no.
That's my biggest concern. Is not so much him as an actual player, although his concerns are concerning, for lack of a
Hmm.
better word.
Yes, yes.
It's the fact that I don't trust. There's very few coaching staffs in place right now that would be a good fit for him
Especially ones that
because,
need a quarterback.
right, exactly. That's the problem. We're not one of those teams that I think
Mhm.
are a good place for him to go if he wants to be the best quarterback he can be.
Yeah,
Could he still be like a high variance like player that does have really good games and then struggles at times? Sure, but
I'll say this: if you look at Matt Canada's offenses when he was at like Maryland, where
yeah,
it was a lot of like heavy boot action, going back to that pure sense, I could see Willis doing well in that because he did a good amount of that at Liberty, and
right.
that might work. But and you think about it, Matt Canada had all of his best successes in college, and
Yes.
giving Malik Willis like a collegey offense to start out is probably not the. So I agree with you,
Hmm.
but it might, maybe it's not as bad as I'm being. I guess I'm just being optimistic. I'm trying to
It's
find
it's for
something.
me
Yeah.
more so like I think that he could run an offense that might do well with his strengths, like especially
Mhm.
because he wants to do a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff that mobile quarterbacks need to,
Yeah.
be mobile for. But I want to see him develop as a player more than I think Canada can develop
Yes.
him. He
Yeah.
would be able to maybe prop him up a little
Mhm.
bit,
Yeah.
but what is that? What's the level that he can prop him up
Yeah.
to, and can he supersede that eventually
Yeah.
down the road? So
Yeah, that's very
yeah.
fair. The other one is nose tackle because of Tyson Alualu's
Hmm.
age, and I think I mean they have like guys like Carlos Davis and Chris Wormley to some extent, and Carlos Montravius Adams, who
Yeah.
can be interesting in that role, but for the long term in a defense that needs a nose tackle. Jordan Davis obviously catches my eye as an absolutely insane run defender, and
Yeah.
this is already a defense that is going to take guys like him off on passing downs. But in this division where you have teams that want to run the ball so much, having a guy like Jordan Davis as your nose tackle that will command double teams, which free up guys like Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, maybe Stephon Tuitt, and helps out the linebackers. Having Jordan Davis in front of Devin Bush and whoever the other inside linebackers would be huge. So
It would be. Yeah. For me, like, I just don't think this team is in a place to take him where they would have to probably
that's
take him
fair.
to get him.
Yeah.
Like, that's my biggest problem.
I think there's are you saying at 20?
Yes, it's one.
Okay. Okay. Fair. The other one, second round, Travis Jones, which again, I think he's our favorite to go in the second round because of how good he was at the Senior Bowl. And I've actually just started watching some more of his tape, and I think he's probably maybe not as good of a pass rusher as we initially thought, but he's better than most nose tackles of his size, and he's very, very good against the run. So getting him in the second round would be fantastic, especially with going offensive line in the first.
Yeah, I think like looking at it, like you said, he was a better pass rusher in his reps at the Senior Bowl than he showed on tape.
Mhm.
Which again, I
So those
think
are
he's
1-on-1
still
reps. So yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense.
So like I think he does have pass rush upside though compared to a guy like Davis, which is why like I'm more interested in him not only because the value would be better if you can get him in the second round,
Mhm.
but he's not going to be the run defender that Davis is. Like that, his whole thing is just his size and his ability to do that. But he's good enough at that where I'm not worried about it at all. They can play that role, and I think you could get more out of him on third down if you want to leave him in there at times.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Next guy, I'm gonna go John Ridgeway out of Arkansas,
yeah,
6'4", 327. And this would be that third round pick where it'd be like, all right, this is a little early, but you want to get your guy because
right. Because you
he's
want
he has again that nose
yeah,
tackle that he's gonna stop the run, he's gonna plug the A gaps, maybe not give you as much everywhere else, but he is gonna be solid on those first two downs, and you don't have to worry about it at all.
exactly. Yeah.
And then two guys in the fourth round that I like: Neil Farrell Jr. from LSU, who was
Mm-hmm.
fantastic at the Senior
He's
Bowl,
really good.
very underrated, and DJ Davidson from Arizona State, who I thought when I watched him was basically like, if you want a day three version of Jordan Davis, this is your guy. Like he's 6'5", 325, and he's
Mm-hmm.
a much better mover than Davis is, and has a little bit more pass rush, but really good against the run.
Yeah.
So I like him from Arizona State. And then the other one I want to mention is Noah Ellis, who's 6'4", 359 from Idaho. And
Yeah.
that'd be that round, one of those round 7 picks, or if they trade back.
Flyer picks. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So, and again, like, if you're drafting that in the 7th round, it's like, hey, we need you to play, one or two, like you should play like one down on like 4 series a game, and we'll see how it goes to start out. And then, maybe he
Right, and
plays
go
well.
take it from there. Yeah, see what he
Yeah,
can do. Yeah.
exactly. The other one I want to talk about is wide receiver, because the Steelers are just so obsessed with drafting wide receivers that it'd be hard for me to imagine one where they don't take one.
Yeah.
And with, right now, Claypool and Deontay are the really prime guys, and Ray McLeod, wide receiver 1, obviously.
Right.
But other than that, there really isn't that much. So they do need another guy to be a weapon outside, in my mind.
Yeah, and for me, like the first guy you have listed here,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I would love this, I just don't see us getting him because he's gonna go. I really feel like especially if the combine's good,
Mm-hmm.
gonna
It
go
should be,
somewhere
yeah.
between the 20 and 52 picks, right? So unless you're gonna
Yeah, probably.
move up in the second round, which again I don't like the idea of doing that.
No.
He's probably gone, but we're talking about Christian Watson, of course.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of discourse, by the way, about him lately on Twitter that I've seen, specifically around Browns fans, which I think is funny because they need receiver help like nobody's business.
Mm-hmm.
But if you could get this guy on the outside and let Claypool play more in the slot, like we've been talking
Mm-hmm.
about, especially me, I've been advocating for that a lot. Really, even going back to last year. But you have Johnson and him on the outside, and have Claypool be that catch and run threat in the middle. Whoever the quarterback's going to be is going to have a much easier time trying to get the ball out to people if that's the setup we have.
Also, like, if you want to actually finally start getting Deontay Johnson some reps in the slot, like, there aren't going to be two teams that have two corners that can match up with
No.
four receivers.
Yeah, if you're gonna, even if obviously like Claypool will still be able to play inside and out, and that's what I hope they use him more as, just more inside. But yeah, if you have those two on the outside with each other, like who do you? I don't even know what you do in that situation,
Exactly,
like, matchup wise.
And the other guy I have right after him is Justin Ross from Clemson, and Steelers have gone to Clemson for wide receivers before.
They have, yeah.
And Justin Ross was awesome a few years ago. He's had some injury, kind of bad luck, and just was hurt this year apparently too.
Yeah.
But if he is healthy and can get back to that 2019 form, he was going to be like the number one wide receiver in this class during that. I guess that was the Jamar Chase year, but it was going to be him and it was going to be Chase and Ross before he got he had like a neck and back injury.
He had a lot of stuff happen. Like, I just want to see, like, assuming I think he's going to be able to compete at the combine.
I think so as well. Because he had like an ankle injury towards the end of the year, so I think that's healed up.
Okay, but if he tests well and he looks good, first of all, his stock could really really skyrocket if he looks like the guy that was being touted as that type of receiver. But if he just tests well enough, I think he's a guy that definitely would be nice to have on this team as long as he can keep the injuries at bay a little bit, which tough.
And then one guy, actually, there's two guys, and they're very different. So the first one is Romeo Dubs from Nevada.
Yes.
6'2", 204. Played it in Nevada's air raid scheme, but he has a really nuanced route runner, has run a very diverse route tree. So he presents a very different profile because he's not necessarily your run after the catch guy that, Johnson and Claypool are. I don't think he's necessarily like the best just vertically receiver, but he's very good at just like, your more nuanced routes that go over the middle of the field. And I think whoever the next quarterback is, that's going to be really important. So he's a bit of a different guy than Steelers have had for a while, but I really like his game. And then Charleston Rambo I have here because that's one of the greatest names I've ever heard.
Yes.
Wide receiver out of Miami. And a lot of people have been saying the Steelers need a guy that can take the top off of defense with his speed. That's Charleston Rambo.
Yeah, his whole thing, like going back to
and he's not like
Oklahoma, he was that guy that just took the top off the defense.
And unlike a lot of the other speedsters in this class, your Calvin Austins, your Wandale Robinsons, like this guy actually has size. He's 6 foot 180, and and like this is like kind of like a Mike Wallace kind of player who's just gonna burn you deep and then open things up for everybody else. So I really like the idea of taking him in that third round. I've been seeing a lot of stuff. I need to watch him, but it's Eric Ezukanma from Texas Tech, who I know is 6'2", 220, but I don't really know much else about him. And
I don't know much either.
Okay.
The name's familiar, but I haven't looked at him much at all.
Yeah, I need to check him out because he might be something interesting.
That profile, body type,
I think he's kind of like that big slot. Like this would be a Juju replacement that would keep Claypool outside, but I've seen a lot of fans of his. So I have some ancillary needs, and we're kind of running a little long on this. I don't want to go through all of them. So which ones do you want to go over?
Well, looking at inside linebacker, Troy Anderson is a favorite of mine.
Oh yeah,
we've talked about him before, but like he's a guy that like just again watching his tape is hilarious.
With how his combine is with how I think he's gonna run the combine, I'd be very surprised if he's there in the third round.
That's the problem, right? Yeah. Is like if he's there, all I'm gonna say is I'm gonna have a very similar thought process that I did whenever like as much as I like Freiermuth and I liked how that pick turned out. If we don't take him and he's on the board with that pick and we take someone else, I'm gonna be like, what are we doing, guys?
Yeah. Yep.
Like what's happening here?
Yeah. And he'd be the perfect buck linebacker that comes downhill, takes on blocks, and kind of allows Devin Bush to run a little more free. And he can drop into coverage too. Like
that's the thing is his athleticism gives him the upside to not just be that guy, but he's a better fit for that than what Bush can do for that.
So. That's the case with another guy, Leo Chanal out of Wisconsin, who's 6'2", 261, and he's huge. And like again, like I recently wrote up Darian Beavers from Cincinnati, who I was texting you. I did not like at all.
No, his limited athleticism.
He is not a good athlete. Whereas Leo Chanal, I think, could be maybe not the best like straight line speed, but he's got short area quickness.
I've heard some stuff from specifically. I think it's Coach Vass on Twitter and on his stuff.
Okay.
He mentioned him, and he's like his combine is going to surprise people. Is what he specifically said.
Yep.
And if that's the case, that could vault him a little higher than what he's been projected. So
those Wisconsin dudes are like
they always, as a fan of the team,
they're always sneakily athletic.
They are. They're either huge freaking mountains of people, but they have way better athleticism than you expect.
They know how to run with their weight.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Another guy that I kind of like in that role would be Dimon Clark from LSU, who has been there a long time, and I've heard a lot of talk about him being like one of those first guys off the bus kind of guys. And I think he played like a more of an edge linebacker a few years ago, and then he's transitioned inside. But again, perfect buck linebacker. He's been a leader for that team. Be a bigger guy to kind of be the thumper as opposed to Devin Bush. Anything else you want to hit on these ancillary needs?
Really, I mean, running back's interesting. There's a guy that we don't have on this list that we have here that I'm very intrigued by, which is Quandary White.
Okay.
As like he's such an interesting watch because of just the way he is. Really, it's his cutting ability that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Like the way that he's able to change direction, and I think he's going to be a pass catcher in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, he'd be an interesting guy, but like just getting in general, like one of these day 3-ish running backs that can come in and actually help, just not have to have Harris carry the entire load is a big thing.
Yeah, this would be one of the positions I'd want them to target if they trade back and get a 5th and 6th round pick.
Exactly,
because
100%.
I think once you get into 7th, and they have an early 7th round pick because of a trade, so that might be, if there's a guy that fell, that'd be fine. But there's a big chunk of meat in the middle of this class, like in the middle of day 3. Once you get into late day 3, it kind of peters out. But one of the guys I really like is Ty Chandler at North Carolina, who was formerly Tennessee, who is a really good. He's 5'11", 203 pounds, and Steelers love their running backs to be above 200 pounds. So that eliminates a lot of like the small scat back types. But Ty Chandler, I think, he's a very quality running back, and he's an excellent pass catcher. So he would be kind of your default third down, replacement for Najee, who's can do everything. So I like him a lot. And then Ricky Person Jr. from North Carolina State. I like both North Carolina State running backs, honestly, but Person is interesting because he's 6'1", 222, so he's bigger. But he also has history as a kick returner, and I kind of like the idea of having those bigger, longer running backs as kick returners, because once they kind of get ahead of steam going, they're very hard to bring down.
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing.
And he's done a lot of stuff with North Carolina State. Like, he's not as much as like Jalen Samuels did back in the day, but very versatile player. And he would be a round 7 guy that, like, all right, sweet, we got this is a value pick that can help us on teams, and maybe can give you. He can do what Kalen Ballage did, but a little better. And that's
right. I think he's a better player than.
If that's a 7th round pick, that's fantastic.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. So I think, unless you see any names you want to dive into,
no, I think right now,
right.
I think and we definitely hit like we're in the ancillary, and it's like these are players that like.
Also, I just want to say, if this team drafts Connor Hayward, I will be very disappointed, because spending one of 5 or 6 draft picks on a fullback, even though he is Cam Hayward's brother, we just don't have the draft capital.
Here's what I'm going to say with that, right? Like, I agree with that, but hey, let's just hope that he's a priority free agent. Let's just hope that he's that.
I mean, I think
I think he'll get drafted.
He might be the best fullback in this class. So
I think he'll end up being like a 6th, 7th round guy, though, which whatever. But
all right. Well, that'll do it for us for this week. So we'll be back next week, kind of breaking down some guys that impressed us at the combine, especially from the guys we mentioned. See if some guys had really good days that might put them on the Steelers' radar, had really bad days that might help them fall to the Steelers, would be fantastic. But in the meantime, Shane, let the people know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me at Shane Kubis on Twitter and at SteelersATB, where probably some of these players, especially the ones that we covered, if they do anything kind of insane, you may be seeing me retweet those with some reactionary stuff there. So we'll see about that. But that's all you can find me for right now.
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE, on Twitter. Make sure you're following myself there. Follow Shane on his account. Follow Around the Block on Twitter. Follow ATV Football. Follow a lot of our other draft analysts. I'm sure we'll be tweeting about all this stuff.
Yes, of course,
make sure you're following Around the Block on YouTube, Twitch, subscribe to the podcast, all that. Thank you all for listening, and we hope to have you back next time.